I built this hardwood desk from scratch using hand tools in my one-bedroom apartment, and in this video I'm going to show you how I did it. I work from home on a computer, and a lot of my job involves using spreadsheets, so I have a huge second monitor that I find really helpful. This makes having the right desk a necessity. Darianne and I also live in a one-bedroom apartment, which suits us very well right now, but it does mean that space must be very thoughtfully considered. For the last 4 years, I used this really inexpensive folding desk that happened to be perfectly proportioned and was really convenient to move with because it folds up completely flat. Nice desks are really expensive. I didn't want to spend $700 or $800 on something that would end up being only marginally nicer, and I couldn't justify spending thousands of dollars on something very high-end. A lot of desks are also much bigger than I have space to accommodate, and I have no interest in getting something bigger for the sake of it being bigger. So a custom build is what made the most sense, and I saw this YouTube video a while back from a woodworking creator that I follow called Four Eyes Furniture, where he built a desk that I really liked the design of, and he's even got some plans available that made a really great starting point. I still had my folding desk, which was perfectly functional, so I wasn't in any rush, and so I waited until we made the move from Boston to Philly. After we settled into our new apartment, it was still a one-bedroom apartment, so I got the idea that I would attempt to build this desk using a few small and simple hand tools, and if it failed miserably, I could just continue using my current desk. I ordered the wood from WoodWorkersSource, and I got walnut for the legs and purple heart for the top. I thought it would give a really cool and unique color contrast. First step was to get my hand plane set up and to sharpen the iron. This is a Japanese style hand plane, and I got it on Amazon for about 20 bucks. It ended up being great, but it did take a lot of work out of the box to get it sharp and flat. I had 4 Purple Heart boards that were 5.5 inches wide, 36 inches long, and 3/4 of an inch thick. I didn't have a big power jointer, of course, to create a perfect 90-degree angle. All I needed to achieve was coplanarity. So with 2 pieces clamped together, I used the hand plane to remove a small amount of material but make the edges coplanar relative to each other. Next was to measure and mark the legs. I didn't have a protractor, so I found a free app that uses your phone's camera to overlay any angle. It's pretty rough, but it worked just fine in a pinch. The 4 legs would come from 2 boards, with half of a third board used to create 2 stretchers that would add structure and rigidity. For clamping, I used these vacuum vices that stick on any smooth, glassy surface, like my kitchen counter, and they aren't perfect, but they did get the job done just fine. I made the shortcuts first, which went pretty well, and then I used the hand plane to smooth the saw marks. Next, it was time to dive into the long cuts. These were tough, and there was no way around them being tough using just a small handsaw. I remember watching a Paul Sellers video about sawing straight with a handsaw, and I tried to follow some of those principles, such as switching sides frequently to keep it as even as possible. I coated the saw blade with wax frequently to reduce friction, which also helped. Because these were the edges of the legs, they were not technically functional cuts, but purely aesthetic, which made me a little bit less anxious, but given how much time I had already invested, I was pretty keen on getting them to be as close to perfect as I could. These were long and arduous cuts, but my patience paid off and the results were better than I expected. Coming back to the top panel, I made sure to keep the pieces well marked because orientation matters even more after the planing, and to switch it up now could cause a lot more problems. I decided that I was going to add 3 small dowels per seam because these boards were only 3/4 of an inch thick and would benefit from the added strength, but it would also help keep the panel dead flat during the glue up. I found this neat little dowel jig kit that makes centering a dowel on one edge and mirroring it exactly on another really simple. But of course I am uniquely stubborn, and by this point I was too committed to the whole hand tool thing, so I attempted to do this with a hand drill. Purple Heart wood is really hard, and managing this hand drill was nearly the thing that broke me during this build. It was more tedious than those long cuts with the handsaw, even if it took less total time. Plus, you can get a power drill for the same price or less as a hand drill like this, so that probably would have been a better way to go. But I persevered and I did end up managing it. So the next step was to add glue and connect the 4 boards to form the top panel. I used Titebond 3 wood glue, and as you can see here, it wasn't the neatest job, but I wanted to make sure that I had really good coverage, especially with the boards being relatively thin. I clamped them using 4 bar clamps with 2 on top and 2 on bottom to give as even of directional force as possible. Because of the doweling, I was less worried about warping and slippage, and I didn't need to use cauls given the size of the panel. Next, I needed to clean up the legs. The handsaw was not bad, but it still looked, well, hand-sawn. So again, being in no big rush, I took the time to use my trusty hand plane to clean them up and make them look pretty. In which I think I ended up being more successful than I even dared hope. I think they look really, really amazing. Plus, the walnut is quite a bit softer than the Purple Heart, so it was really satisfying to plane. With the top panel fully dry, it was time to clean up the glue and hit the seams with the hand plane to smooth any little unevenness, since I don't have a big thickness planer to run the whole thing through at once. After that, I began the most messy part of this project, sanding. I started at about 80 grit and went all the way up to 1000 grit for a really fine finish. I nearly forgot that one of my floorboards happened to be like 1/8 of an inch longer than the rest, so I had to clean that up quickly too. Sanding was done by hand too, of course, and I definitely underestimated how this fine purple dust would coat my entire kitchen, but I think it was worth it. I used tung oil for the finish. It's a really eco-friendly finish and intensifies the purple color. I forgot to account for the smaller size of my desk when modifying the original plans from 4eyes, so my angles, as they were, would have made the legs stick out way in front of the front edge of the top panel, and I had to make a last-minute recut to accommodate the smaller size. I also made very light passes with the hand plane on the corners of all the legs, which I think was a nice detail to add. I added a dowel to each of the connections between the legs and the stretcher, so 4 in total, and glued them with the same wood glue. Once they were dry, I finished them with tung oil too, which made the walnut look too nice. Lastly, with everything sanded and finished, it was time for final assembly. I used 2 dowels per stretcher to connect the leg constructions to the top panel. This drilling was the most nerve-wracking yet because of how much time and effort I had already put into that top panel, and now I was just drilling right into it. It's a secret, but I actually did mess one up, but it was in the length positioning, so it ends up being completely hidden by the body of the stretcher. I didn't take any video of the final glue up because I was just really ready to be finished at this point, but I'm so happy with the result. Now it's October, and I built this desk over 4 weekends in July, and so I've been using it daily for over 2 months, and honestly it's nicer than I could have imagined it would be. Making things with my hands has always been important to me. It's one of the things that I love about the practice of film photography and darkroom printing. It gives me a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment that means the world to me, and I'm really glad that I undertook this little project. Of course, I'm already planning on what I'm gonna make next, and one of those things is a bunch of frames for a little gallery wall, and I can't wait to share more of that. So until next time, shoot more film, make more things.